shadows gather, when the raven swallows the day.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Rambeard, and I welcome you to part 2 of the Legacy of the Arakkoa series. Last time we ended with Tarok being banished to the Shadow Realm by his Talon priests, in the hopes of him rejuvenating. I noticed that near the end of the video I mentioned that not all flying Arakkoa are adherents, without having used the term adherent before. The Adherents of Rukmar are a faction within the higher Arakkoan society. The members of this faction are the ones that overthrew Tarok and threw him into the pools of Sethe. They believe that anything shadow related is abominable and are fanatic followers of Rukmar, and Rukmar alone. In the Waters of Draenor timeline, the banishment of Tarok went fairly well for the Adherents. They came to rise with Tarok gone and started a harsh rule. Their leadership managed to remove all, or almost all, praising mentions of Tarok from their history books. Growing up, new Arakkoa were told that Tarok had been a vile ruler, that he had committed atrocious acts, and that he had dabbled in shadowy powers. One thing that came from this was the prohibition of the use of shadow magics, while the Outcasts had just been blessed with shadowy powers by Anzu. This is the first time we see a very clear light versus shadow conflict. The Adherent society made Skyreach their capital, and a very magnificent picture of that culture is formed in the Blizzard official short story Apocrypha, which I will link in the description. I highly recommend you read it yourself, but I will also give you a summarized version now, as it depicts events that are of great importance to the future story. After Tarok's Talon priests banished him to the Realm of Shadow, there was no one leader of the Outcasts for a while. In our timeline, there would not be one at all, but in the Waters of Draenor timeline, an outcast by the name of Iskar would eventually take on the role of leader. During events we will discuss in the future, an Arakkoa by the name of Rashad tells a fellow outcast about Iskar's life as an adherent, before he was thrown off of Skyreach. This tale is what makes up Apocrypha. A long time ago, but recent enough for all Arakkoa to remember Tarok as a criminal, there were two adherents. Adherent Vyrix, a feisty female, and Adherent Iskar, a timid one that preferred knowledge over power. Before an Arakkoa is given a name, his or her role in society is already determined. Together with a role, they are assigned a clutch brother or sister. Instead of living life as an individual, all Arakkoa live life as a duo. If one of the two does something good, both are praised. If one makes a mistake, both are punished. And oh my, did Iskar have it rough. Vyrix was his clutch sister, and boy did she make many mistakes. Her feistiness got her to become somewhat adventurous, leading to inappropriate behavior. She was so beautiful though, and so promising as a sun sage, that her punishment would only be mild. Iskar would always end up with the shorter end of the stick, or the longer end of the whip in this case. One day, Iskar and Vyrix were out in the woods, killing Ravager larvae as punishment. Vyrix was obsessed with the Apex's artifact she used to burn the grub, but Iskar was not so amused. He wanted to return to Skyreach, as the sun would soon set. Vyrix, enjoying her little burning, went out even further into the woods, trying to kill as many larvae as she could, with Iskar on her tail, trying to convince her to go home. She saw that they had gone too far. Iskar saw it too, and quickly prayed to Rukmar. They saw an outcast, a rare sight for adherents not fully grown. With a paranoid Iskar behind her, Vyrix hid behind some canopy near the outcast to listen to what he was doing. "Shadows gather," the outcast said. A cloud of smoke appeared, and revealed another outcast that said, "When the raven swallows the day." The first outcast mentioned a scroll and the name of the outcast previously hidden by shadows, Rashad. At this moment, Vyrix accidentally crushed a branch, leading to the first outcast turning his head to her, looking her in the eyes. It was then that Vyrix saw he was not an outcast at all, but a proper Arakkoa. He immediately flew away and Vyrix pursued. She caught him quickly and recognized him as an adherent by the name of Ikis. Ikis was respectable, but before Vyrix could question him, several full-grown adherents came from the sky. They were blade talons, elite warriors. Ikis quickly muttered something only Vyrix could hear. "Tarok, the ancient king, it is lies, all lies. What he was, what he did, what the curse is." You should know that the sages of Skyreach told everyone that Sethe's curse was infectious and could be transmitted through air. Standing near an outcast would supposedly pose you with a chance of getting infected. After this gibberish, the Blade Talons sent Vyrix and the newly arrived Iskar back to Skyreach. The current Arakkoan leader was a sun sage by the name of Zelkir, the voice of Rukmar as he was known. It was Zelkir himself who whipped Iskar time and time again, using Rukmar's tail. a whip made out of fire. After his whipping, Iskar spoke to Zelkir, promising him to not let it happen again. Zelkir bestowed a peculiar task upon Iskar though. The young adherent was to observe his own clutch sister. Spy on her, if you will. Zelkir was afraid she had been cursed due to her being in such close proximity with the outcast Rashad. Iskar was not sure if he was betraying his clutch sister, or if he was protecting her, but he obeyed. Phyrix was in deep thought about all that had happened. A sun priest was performing cleansing rituals on her every day to make sure she stayed pure. But we all know that it's not the curse that caused Phyrix to doubt, it was her own free will. She knew Icus would be thrown off of Skyreach soon, after his wings had been cut off. Still, she thought, why would he risk all he had in Skyreach for something as strange as speaking with an outcast? Eventually, her curiosity got the best of her, and she went into the great archives of Skyreach. Looking up information on Tarok, she found that in every history book, even those written centuries apart from each other, Tarok's reign was depicted exactly the same. Of course, it could be coincidence, but what a strange coincidence indeed. We of course know that it was the same everywhere, as the adherents of Rukmar had rewritten the books to exclude any positive mention of Tarok. Phyrix felt sorry for Iskar about his whipping, as she had only been locked up for a while. She decided to leave Iskar out of the research on Tarok. Iskar was following her silently though, and quickly found out she was researching Tarok, avoiding contact with any other Arakkoa as much as she could. When Iskar returned to Zelkir, he did not tell his superior about the defects of his clutch sister at all, hoping that he could avert what he thought were the symptoms of the curse. After his encounter with Zelkir, Iskar went to his clutch sister and told her that he knew about her research. Despite his warnings, Phyrix did not want to stop what she had started. On the day of Icus' banishment, Phyrix was nowhere to be seen, while Iskar looked how High Sage Zelkir cut off Icus' wings, thinking of his clutch sister. Phyrix silently walked through Vylakraz, an outcast village. She was in disguise and went unnoticed. She went up to the hut where she had seen Icus with the outcast the other day and spoke the words, "Shadows gather." For a moment there was only silence, but then Rashad appeared. "When the raven swallows the day." After a small encounter, Rashad thought Phyrix to be trustable and handed her a scroll. The scroll Icus had spoken of previously. Rashad said that the contents of this scroll would bring the Arakkoa and the outcasts back together. Despite the disgust the thought of walking among outcasts brought her, Phyrix accepted the scroll and left. Outside, before she was far enough away from Vylakraz to fly again, she was leaped on by no other than Iskar. Iskar allowed his clutch sister to explain herself, and back in Skyreach they looked at the scroll together. It contained several ancient documents about all sorts of things, mainly Tarok and his daughter Lithik. It mentioned the Sethek Hollow, where Sethek's blood had dropped, and where the curse had originated. Slowly they came to realize that everything they knew was lies. Nothing about their society was built on truth, and Iskar could not handle this thought. Of course, they could not be sure this scroll held the truth, but it seemed so important. This is where Iskar and Phyrix both made a decision that led up to their role in the oncoming stories. Phyrix could not believe the scroll and wanted to destroy it. Iskar, on the other hand, wanted to preserve the scroll, despite the fact that he had not been as much of a heretic as Phyrix had been. Before Iskar could do anything, Phyrix burned the scroll. Iskar caught in vain, and out of nowhere 2 armed blade talons entered their roost, followed by High Sage Zelkir. Apparently, he had been watching both Iskar and Phyrix, since he had given his orders to Iskar all those days ago. The fact that Phyrix had chosen the well-being of Arakkoan society over the truth had proven her worthiness. And although she was punished, she could continue her training. Iskar, on the other hand, was not so fortunate. He did not even receive the long end of the whip this time. Without the normal ceremony that went with it, his wings were cut off, and he was tossed off of Skyreach. This is where the story ends. Remember Iskar well, and his clutch sister just as well. For now you must be wondering though, how could this all have happened without any major consequences on Outland? Iskar was never even mentioned in our timeline. A very good question indeed. Iskar and his sister might have existed, or might not have. But you must surely know the positioning of Arak, just south of Talador. When the Alliance forces in our timeline assaulted Draenor to repel the Orcish threat, Ner'zhul of the Shadowing clan opened portals to all sorts of different worlds and dimensions. The creation of so many interdimensional portals caused the entire world to tear apart, leading to Draenor's destruction and the forming of Outland. During all this, the entire zone of Arak was removed from existence, including Skyreach and all the spires. With it, a lot of the major Warlords of Draenor characters were straight up killed. Iskar, Phyrix, Rashad, and many others never reached safety on Outland. Only the outcasts of Sketis and their many colonies survived. It is safe to say that not one flying Arakkoa survived Trainor's destruction, which is kind of peculiar, as you might have imagined at least one single Arakkoa could fly to safety. With their bloodthirst, the orcs did not see the outcasts as anything other than living creatures that could die, so they started to wage war on them. In the alternate timeline, the Shattered Hand orcs are the only ones actively fighting the Arakkoa there, but in our timeline, almost all orcs raged against the poor bird people. Some of the lower ranked outcasts that fled Sketis when Tarok was going crazy, and that had been attacked by orcs, decided to side with the Alliance expedition. An outcast by the name of Drisik, for instance, led Danath Trollbane's forces to Auchindoun, serving as a tracker. It is very important to realize who we, the player, side with when it comes to Arakkoa and outcasts. I've noticed that during our different encounters with Arakkoa, we basically side with whoever we meet first. Try to take note of this. Our first encounter with Arakkoa on Outland must be in Hellfire Peninsula, the Den of Halesh to be more precise. These outcasts could be sided with anyone, but as they have been attacking Alliance patrols, we are sent to just murder them all. Then in Shattrath City, we meet some more sophisticated Arakkoa. Leading the lower city bunch is an outcast by the name of Rylok the Redeemed, who we do not actually see during Warlords of Draenor. Rylok shows us how the affiliations are. He and the other lower city outcasts have seen the light through Adal. This means they find the use of shadow magic by all the outcasts a bad thing. I guess it's not too weird that we side with them, as we generally support Adal. Rylok tells us of two orbs similar to the orb Tarok once got from Enzu to contact him, the Eye of Enzu. Namely, the Eye of Val Resk and the Eye of Val Shinor. He tells us Tarok uses these eyes to see what's going on in these vales. I reckon he managed to replicate the power of the Eye of Enzu to make these similar orbs his own. We gather the orbs for Rylok, who tells us Tarok is looking to the south, where he is doing all sorts of shadowy business. We are sent to Kirik the Awakened in the Bone Wastes. Rylok tells us it was Kirik that led a bunch of outcasts that lost their faith in Tarok out of Sketis. We complete several quests for him, dealing with outcasts from the Vales located around southern Terragar forest. There is a bit of text I'd like to quote that might make you think about our decision to side with these lower city outcasts. Kirik says this when we destroy an artifact of the outcasts in Val's Kith with the intentions to purify it. If the touch of the blessed Naru, Adal, is not enough to bring the Arakkoa to redemption, nothing will be. Those who have not given themselves over to the light are mere servants of evil. They must be destroyed. It's as blank as saying, you don't believe what I believe and therefore you must die. Something completely different that's worth mentioning is that one of the quests, in which we try to purify young Kaliri hatchlings, takes place in Val Lithic, obviously named after Tarok's daughter. After we've completed Kirik's tasks, we are sent back to Shattrath to inform Rylok. There we are attacked by huge Kaliri from Sketis, but we manage to fend them off. After all this, we do not immediately assault Sketis. Before we rush to the capital of Outcasts, we venture into the Shadowmoon Valley. A griffin rider by the name of Kiron tells us about ghostly outcasts that have been preparing for something around the area. They are much more powerful than originally estimated, so we are sent to wreak havoc around their camps and gather intel on what they're planning to do. Most of the intel we gather is hard to transcribe, but Kiron tells us about a deserter that is mentioned. We fly around and find an outcast by the name of Parsha. Parsha tells us about the outcasts of Shadowmoon Valley. Before the First War, a group of outcasts, loyal to Sketis, went to Shadowmoon Valley and formed the Dark Conclave. Although Arakkoa in general aren't the most shamanistic creatures, they thought it awful that Gul'dan wanted to sever the orcs from their elemental spirits, only relying on necromancy and the like. They prepared an attack on Gul'dan while he was performing his ritual, but Gul'dan is pretty smart and he realized what the outcasts were up to. Powerful as Gul'dan is, he casted a massive spell that destroyed all of the outcasts' camps in Shadowmoon Valley and killed all outcasts, aside from Pasha, I guess, who had abandoned the camps. Death did not stop the Dark Conclave, however, and they prepared to summon a massive being into the world that could crush Gul'dan. Whether they intended to or not, they actually started summoning an old god. He kinda looks like a second Cthulhu. I'm kidding. Never ever say Cthulhu. It's Cthulhu. Pasha guides us with the gathering of several powerful artifacts that he can combine into a staff. This staff allows us to counter the summoning ritual of the undead outcasts. We go to Skethlon base camp, where the old god is being summoned, and we stop the ritual. With that, the Dark Conclave is pushed back enough and we leave them be. Note that the Outcasts on Draenor never really set up camp in Shadowmoon Valley, but I guess that the fact that Skyreach and the Arakkoa were not destroyed left them with enough troubles in Iraq that settling in Shadowmoon Valley would be thinning their numbers unnecessarily. There is of course Arcanist Delath, the Outcast enchanter that teaches us Draenor enchanting in a small questline. But I think that's the only outcast around. Now then, I think it's time we talk about Sketis. Our timeline Sketis, that is. We first go to Sketis when meeting up with the Shatari Skyguard, and during our questing around the area, we continuously work together with this faction. Upon our arrival, we hear about Sky Commander Adherents, who keeps on babbling about a world of shadows where the true Arakkoa leaders dwell. Note that in this part about Sketis, Arakkoa refers to Outcast. I'll use the term Arakkoa nonetheless, as this is how they are described in the several quests. The person telling us about this is Severin, another member of the Skyguard. He wants us to just gather some shadow dust, which the commander says to be a reagent for an elixir that would allow one to see into the Shadow Realm, despite Severin not believing Adherents. It turns out Adherents was right about the Shadow Realm, and the elixir actually works. Now we're able to see into the shadows. We are told about Val Alarak in the eastern part of Sketis. There, several Talon priests would lurk in the shadows, and oh my, shadows are very bad indeed. We are ordered to just kill all the Talon priests, because all our encounters in Outland led us to believe the Arakkoa here are our sworn enemies. We go around and kill the Talon priests. Oh, wait a minute. We know these Arakkoa. We just killed Ishal, Skizik, and Zelek, the three highest ranked Talon priests that banished Tarok to the Shadow Realm as they didn't want him to go about his shady business. We should be thankful to them for banishing Tarok, but oh well, it's too late for that now. On Ishal's body, we find a peculiar book, Ishal's Almanac. We're unable to make sense of it, so we ought to bring it to Rylak back in Shatrath. Rylak is able to read it and is stunned. Apparently, the Talon priests were in the midst of summoning back Tarok to our world. By this point, they probably hoped that Tarok had been rejuvenated. There is no precise indication of how long it's been since Tarok's banishment, but on an archaeology find and in the Apocrypha, we find it's been at least several decades, centuries even. We return to Adherents with the news, and he tells us to leave it up to the Skyguard, as they don't believe Tarok can actually return. We're contacted by another outcast, Hazik. He tells us of a way to summon Tarok to our world preemptively, so that he is not in his full strength. Tarok's return would be preluded by the defeat of some of his ancient enemies, so we kill these creatures. Hazik prepares a time-lost offering made from pieces of Tarok's old enemies that we can use to summon Tarok. At this point, Adherents realizes the threat of Tarok as well and joins in. We go to the center of the lake in Sketis and summon Tarok. An epic battle commences, and we finally defeat the old Talon King. Of course, there are remnants of the Outcasts in Outland, but we'll discuss those later on. For now, this is the end of the Outland questline. Your mind must be boggling with questions. What correlation is there between these epic questlines and our business on Draenor? Will we ever care for the slain Talon priests? How will this all play out? All these questions must wait until the final part of this video series, however. I hope you enjoyed the second part in this Arakkoan series, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at the last part. For now, I bid you farewell. Goodbye.